Nothing is more important than leading your people well. You got to remember, people deserve to be led well. Um, if you're not sure if you're leading well, you should just assume you're not. I'm telling you, the overwhelming amount of evidence out there is actually most managers are pretty bad at the job. Even if they think they're good, they're usually bad. Even if their boss is telling them they're good, they're usually bad. It is the manager, Brendan, who creates or destroys the circumstances under which that occurs. What could possibly be more important than doing that every day?
Russ, you're very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
You're very, very welcome. It's been a while in coming, but it's wonderful to see you here. Our vision, Russ, is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So I open up the show with this question to all of our guests: what does scaling with purpose mean to you, Russ?
Yeah, so this is a vision that's very close to my heart. Both, I think the word scale and the word purpose have a lot of meaning to me personally. So first, just on the word scale, I feel like it's a top three misused word in business. Strategy, most misused. Prioritization, second most misused. Scale, third. And a lot of people, say scaling. They generally mean it as a synonym for growth. I don't. It doesn't bother me too much that happens, but in terms of the way I think about answering your question, I'm thinking about the microeconomics idea of increasing returns to scale, which means more and more units of output for fewer and fewer units of input, which is to say growth while becoming much more efficient. And so it's not a linear relationship between, say, your hiring and your revenue. It's, you're getting more and more revenue for each hire. So that aside, I know we're going to get to this, but I wrote a book, and after I get through the introduction and I clear the thesis of the book, there's, three sections of practical advice: direction, coaching, career. The very first part of the direction section of the book is about defining a purpose for your team as a manager. And I consider this critical hygiene for every team. I don't care if you're a frontline team. It's not just something Zuckerberg does or Elon or, whoever. It's actually, I think, critical hygiene. And the reason is because purpose scales. There will be moments throughout a quarter, throughout a year, where specific direction or guidance isn't there. And a team purpose that was developed collaboratively with your team serves as somewhat of an invisible leader. It can give, general direction and guidance when specific direction and guidance aren't there. So that's kind of one idea, and that scales really nicely, right? You do that work one time and it can scale over the course of many years, actually, for a team and a growing team. Second thing, I would say I wasn't fully conscious of what I'm about to say early in my career, but when I look back on my career now, clearly my purpose was to be a good manager. And by be a good manager, the standard is, that my job was always to create circumstances in which people could do their best work and be totally psyched while doing it. Right. And I've personally scaled. So, whether it was my first job at Google, I had 10 folks. My first job in the US Marines, I had 40, that order of magnitude. I managed more and more people and more revenue, right? 700 people at Google at one point, 700 million in revenue was, one of my go-to-market jobs. So it's kind of scaled the idea of being a good manager over more larger teams or larger sort of scope. And then eventually moving into a place like Goodwater, where I'm operating partner and affecting our portfolio. So now we're into thousands of people, and then on to the book where I wrote a book about how to great manager that can ostensibly affect hundreds of thousands. I mean, ideally millions, but we haven't gotten there yet. But millions. And so, so I think just it's sort of this idea that's been very present throughout my entire career: scaling with purpose, or scaling my purpose, or scaling up purpose, or scaling the notion of purpose. There's a few different ways to go there. So I don't know. Does that feel like it hits the mark for kind of what you're trying to do, or what?
Russ, I can tell you, I had 18 questions that I had researched for you, and I feel like kind of setting those aside, you've just given me a podcast with everything that you've said in terms of the depth of that answer. There are a number of things that I want to pick up on before I do get into my questions, because I truly believe that the business that you're leading is an expression of how you have personally scaled. And you're the first guest that we've ever had on who has referenced personal scaling. So before we get into your wonderful book, which you've referenced, can you just share with our listeners what you mean by that, and practically some of the things that are now just part of your life that you have embedded to personally scale?
Yeah. Yeah. So um in my bio, you would, folks would have heard I've been an executive, chief people officer at a couple stops, one for a publicly held company. Um, and every stage of being a manager, there's a sort of these sort of new discrete set of challenges. First time being a manager is really it's by far the most jarring when you make that transition. Then there's this managing managers transition that is not nearly as jarring, but it requires a whole new set of ideas. And that's probably the first place where scale really starts to come in. But then there's the idea of becoming executive, which is, oh my gosh, a whole new set of considerations. And if you didn't learn how to scale yourself as a manager of managers, when you become an executive, it's going to be a nightmare. And so scaling yourself as a manager of managers, you have to start to get really comfortable with two pretty simple ideas, simple to say, a little harder to do. Number one is on a daily basis, you have to get extremely comfortable with deciding exactly what you won't do. I was just coaching a friend of mine who works over at YouTube, and was talking him through how important it is for him to literally not respond to emails. This sounds ridiculous on one level, and it's hard for him. He cares about people. He wants to be very responsive to everyone. And I was like, listen, man, you if it's important enough, people come find you. In my experience, most stuff isn't that important. And so it's not just about being a jerk and being unresponsive to people. I don't want folks to hear the wrong thing. It's about actually making a proactive and intentional decision about what you will not do every day, because you have to focus on the things that matter most. So that's kind of the first thing. And unskilled newer managers, they understand that conceptually. They almost never do it. And then as you advance through kind of the management layers, if you don't do this well, you will not survive. So that's kind of what. Second is, though, much more important probably, or intuitive from a scaling standpoint, is you have to get real comfortable with you really need to invest in coaching the people who report to you. I say all the time that an executive's job isn't to run a company. They think it is. They think it is. They think their job is to run the company. Their job is actually to be a great manager for their directs, who in turn then need to be great managers for their directs, who in turn need to be great managers for their directs. Now, an executive has broadcasts to the company opportunities, an occasional note to the company, an all hands setting. And those are important moments where you communicate, ideally, important ideas well. But that's not running the company. An executive has to deal with the board. An executive has to deal with customers. An executive has to do a lot of complicated things. But when you think your job is to run the company, that's a big, monolithic, hard to address idea. Actually, what you need to do is become a great manager for your directs and insist they do the same. And that's how down through the layers of an organization, a big company, that could be 12, 15 layers. It's sad, but it's true. That's how you end up with actually a great company. Everybody is a technically proficient manager for their directs. And that's how you get leverage. And leverage is another word for scale, right? A literal lever, in physics, you put a little bit of force on one end and you get a lot of mechanical advantage on the other end. So those are a couple ideas. They may not be super practical, Brendan. I'm not sure if they hit the mark for you, but conceptually, as you think about life going from a frontline manager through an executive, these are a couple of the coping mechanisms that I believe have led to me being able to scale myself a little bit better than maybe I've seen some others do.
Yeah, focus keeps coming up time and time again, and we've had some wonderful guests on the podcast who have spoken directly to that. I'm thinking of Patrick McKeown here, the international authority on breath, on breathing, and he defines the formula for success as focus multiplied by attention multiplied by concentration, and certainly it's kind of regaled that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates cite their ability to focus as the reason why they're so successful and others aren't. And in terms of being available to your direct those people that you support. I remember posing a question to JT McCormick, the former CEO of Scribe, and I asked him how many direct reports he had. He said, I don't have any, but I have 8 direct supports. And I've always really liked that kind of turning the traditional hierarchy upside down, so that your people are at the top of that, as opposed to the executive team sitting at the top of that. So you mentioned your book. Let's get into this. I love the title, When They Win, We Win. Just clarify for our listeners what you mean by that, Russ.
Yeah, sorry. It's When They Win, You Win. Important. It's really important because the title. I'm actually quite proud. By the way, it turns out it's harder to write a title than it is to write a book.
Just well, I agree with that. I'm going to say that again because for the editing purposes, why did I pick up When They Win, We Win? So I'm going to come back to that again. Russ, I love the title of your book, When They Win, You Win. Can you share with our listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, the title of the book, When They Win, You Win. And then importantly, the subtitle is Being a Great Manager is Simpler Than You Think. So I mentioned a little bit ago, people just want to do great work and be totally psyched while doing it, right? That's sort of the standard for being a great manager. And that's a cool sounding little soundbite, but actually there's quite a bit of math underneath those ideas. And kind of that has a lot of actual intentional meaning. But the basic idea is your job as a manager, really, literally the job description for every manager in the world. I don't care if you're Sundar at Alphabet or if you're managing the front line of the sandwich shop at Subway or whatever, your job is, one, to deliver an aligned result. And aligned is doing a ton of work in there. And two, to enable the success of the people on your teams. Enable the success, and that's short-term success and long-term success. And those 2 points actually map very well to the 3 major sections of the book, direction, coaching, career. But the point of it is your job as a manager is to help your people win. Your job as a manager is to help your people be successful. And this would have been a little too threatening to make the title this way, but it might read, you can't win until they win. Because you as a manager are not successful until every member of your team is. And if we're delivering an aligned result, by definition, if you enable each person on your team to be successful, you will be successful as a manager. But I'd love to impress. So we couldn't quite go with the threatening title. We needed to go with the more uplifting, promissory title. But it is, I do mean it exactly as such. You're not successful unless everyone on your team is. And it's not some arbitrary standard of success. We're supposed to be delivering an aligned result. What is that result? How are we measuring it? And when that's happening for all team members, then you're successful. And only that, literally only that. I don't care if your boss thinks you're great and your team is struggling. You're not successful. Your boss is wrong, which happens all the time, by the way. So it's a pretty high bar. And it's the promise of the book. Here's how to help your team be successful. And only then can you think of yourself as successful.
Yeah, you write for many leaders and managers, I'm paraphrasing there, but it feels like they are hog-tied in the center of a middle school cafeteria while a multi-thousand person food fight is transpiring. Broccoli bouncing off their heads, mashed potatoes sliding down their cheeks. Just get that view in your head when you're listening to this. Russ, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So why write this book? What I hope changes, kind of thing. And one of the things I realized is, despite the mountains of content out there on how to be a better manager, the reality is, measurably, managers are not improving. I kind of prove that in the book. Managers are at best stagnant over the last 30 years, despite the mountains of content. And it occurred to me, and you're like, hey, wait, how can that be, Russ? Right? You've got all this literature and all these podcasts and all these books. How can that be? Well, I think if you asked each person, you know, like I have this fantasy where I can sit down with each luminary in the space, people you've heard of, you know the names, right? Think of them, think of the names. I say, how does your stuff help people be a better manager? Um, I think they would each describe individually something like a manager's walking through a buffet style lunch line, right? And they're going to take a little off the Simon section, a little off the Adam section, a little off the Liz section, a little off the Kim section, one of your guests. And then they have this nutritious meal on their tray. They walk around, and that's a metaphor for they have their leadership toolkit. The problem, of course, is for every manager, it doesn't feel like a leisurely trip through cafe style lunch line. Instead, it feels like the passage you just read. You're hogtied in the center of a middle school cafeteria while a multi-thousand person food fight's transpiring. And the reason for that is because all these people, their stuff is great, but it doesn't hang together. It's way too much, actually, for any to be accessible. But probably most important is absolutely none of it. And I checked. None of the prescriptions offered by anybody else who's written about leadership is held to measurable account. And what I mean by that is the leadership standard that I prescribe. It's not my opinion. Brendan, the world does not need another person's opinion about what it takes to be a great manager. By the way, least of all mine. I mean, we could name 15 people we'd rather hear their opinion, right? There's 15 people 150 people I'd rather hear their opinion. But what we did in this book was we found a set of leadership behaviors that measurably and predictably lead to more engaged employees, that's measurable, happier at work, basically, and better business outcomes, also measurable. And I'm talking about things like quota attainment or measurable engineering productivity, like lines of code or Jira tickets. I'm talking about contract renewal rate. I'm not talking about soft idea. I'm talking about hard, measurable ideas that if you practice this set of behaviors that I outline in the book over and over and over, your teams will be measurably happier and measurably more productive. And I just didn't feel like the book needed another set of opinions. I felt like it needed something a little more rigorous. And so that's ultimately the book that I wrote because of the middle school cafeteria problem that you just read to everybody.
Well, you've teased us with alluding to the leadership behaviors that ultimately and predictably lead to greater engagement, higher engagement, and better outcomes for the business in the context of the measurable business results, like quota, ultimately people will understand listening, profitability. So let's get into these behaviors, Russ. What, fundamentally, where do we start?
Yeah. To simplify, it's, by the way, in the book, probably about a dozen or so. We won't have the time to go through them all. And besides, then people would need to pick up a copy. But they abstract up to three broad sets of behaviors: direction, coaching, and career. Remember that manager job description I mentioned, deliver an aligned result and enable the success of the people? Well, that maps right over top of direction, coaching, career quite well. So delivering an aligned result is all about direction, which is really, it's a 4-part framework for how to make certain, not pretty certain, not I think so, but certain that the people on your team know exactly what is expected of them and when it's expected by. And there's the framework, it's purpose, then vision, then quarterly goals, then priorities. And these are meant to be how long each lasts. A purpose lasts, for most companies and teams, purpose lasts a really long time. Visions actually technically tends to last a little less time, a little more discrete. Quarterly goals last like a quarter. Semi-annual, quarterly is fine. And then ultimately prioritization. I've stolen that word. Are your quarterly goals priorities? Yeah, but you have a word for that, right? That's maybe OKRs or something like that. Is your vision a priority? Yeah, we have a word for that. It's vision. So I've taken priority to mean daily and weekly expressions of work. So that's the idea of direction. And it aligns perfectly, or it overlays perfectly on top of deliver an aligned result. Second manager job description point was enable the success of the people on your teams. Well, the tool you have that's cheap and available every single day is coaching them to be better at this job they're doing right now. 2 kinds of coaching: continue and improve. And that's one version of helping people be successful. Well, there's this other notion of long-term success, which is helping them with their careers, not the next promotion. That's not your career. It's cool. Promotions are cool, a little more money. In a good company, you've probably already taken on more scope before you got promoted, but maybe a little more scope, a little more money, cooler title. But that's not career. It's in fact, I'm not even. I think promotion might be an orthogonal idea to career. Career is really about what's your long-term dream? What do you really want to be when you grow up? And how can we make small investments right now with you in this job? I'm your manager right now. How can I make investments in you? By the way, that will persist beyond these four walls because probably your dream isn't to be, like most people, in my experience, their dream job is not the next level up in whatever they're doing. Um, and so helping people with their long-term success is the idea. So direction, coaching, career overlays on the two-part job description very well. And then those direction, coaching, career break down into a set of behaviors, and the book explores those and tries to highlight which ones most strongly correlate with engagement and results. Some of them have weaker relationships, some have stronger, of course. All leadership behaviors are not created equal. And then also well, that's the question was really about the behaviors, and so high level direction, coaching, career is the answer.
Yeah, I love the clarity in that, and it speaks directly to the second principle of our ScaleX framework, which regular listeners to the podcast will be very familiar with, which is purpose and vision. Purpose is essentially the lens you look through whenever you're creating that vision of the future. The purpose always stays static. It gives the vision energy, and and of course the vision provides the direction. Where are we going? Why are we going there? Coaching falls into the third principle, which the 10 principles are all P's, which is people. Just in the context of coaching, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with this, because in the spirit of the late great Charlie Munger, I was doing an exercise with some of our community this morning, which is the adoption of the mental model, which Charlie always adopted, in inversion thinking. And I was challenging the participants in our own ScaleX community to think about how they could make this the worst year ever. What behaviors would they adopt to make this the worst year ever? So in that context, and kind of the using the mental model of inversion thinking, what behaviors would you see in the worst possible coach you could imagine?
Yeah. One of my favorite cliches that is conventionally wise but all wrong is this idea of, look, I just try to hire great people, and then I try to give them a direction and then get out of their way. You've heard people say that a million times,
Yeah.
right? And it's one of these really cool sounding ideas that is complete horseshit. That's absentee manager. Now, what people are trying to do is they're trying to tell you how they're not going to be a micromanager. And those two ideas are opposite ends of the spectrum. Micromanager, bad. Absentee manager, bad. So your job as a manager is to deliver an aligned result and enable the success of the people on your team. You don't have to know every answer in the spirit of coaching, right? But you need to be engaged and helping folks find those answers. If it's with you or if it's with someone else at the company or outside the company, doesn't matter. Like every day, all day, helping people to be successful. I've never come across somebody who's like, man, I wish my manager would stop helping me be successful. So the worst thing you can be is that person who keeps trying to extract themselves from the team. I'm acknowledging, of course, that there's some point where the way you're behaving as a manager might be too much, and it might feel micromanagerial to people. I'm not talking about nitpicking they did X or Y or Z wrong or right. It's not that. It's getting in there and literally finding out what people need to be more successful or continue to be successful, and doing that over and over. So in a coaching sense or people sense, the worst thing you can do is abide by that conventionally wise idea. But I just kind of tell people what they got to get done, and then I get out of their way. That's you want to create a bad year. That's a bad year. And I know, like, I got a couple things that I say that make managers really uncomfortable because they say them all the time. Another one, like, just for example, if you want to break this open, we can, but we don't have to, which is the distinction between leadership and management that people love to go to a cocktail party and they'll be like, yeah, I think leadership is really different than management. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. And that idea, like, people, I've been on different podcasts and that one gets people like, wait, what? I just said that at a cocktail party on Saturday. But this one that, I tell people what to do and I just get out of the way. It's nonsense. It's not the right way to lead. And it's not actually fulfilling the job description. Deliver an aligned result, enable success of people on your team. So you want a bad year? Do that. Tell people what to do and then get out of their way. That'll be a terrible year for you. I promise.
That can be quite nuanced. I think intuitively we understand when people say that what they mean. We've hired a great person, so I don't need to I don't need to stand over them and cast a shadow on their every decision. So what does great support look like in that context? I always aim to host these podcasts such that the listeners who take the time to listen come away with actionable, practical steps, and I suppose also highlighting things to make them very conscious about, that just describes my recent behavior. So I'm now conscious of not doing that in the interest of being a more coaching leader. So what does great look like to get that right, Russ?
Yeah. I'd say a couple things. One is you're right, it's nuanced. And so what great looks like, the first big variable is your folks. For example, I'm a person who needs, my number one job requirement for myself is autonomy. And so I'm very sensitive to not trampling others' autonomy. You're going to have a bad day if you're my boss and you trample my autonomy. It's good. I always joke that being my boss is the worst job in the world. And I think most of my bosses would agree with me, actually. And the more you trample my autonomy, so I'm kind of aware of the notion of autonomy and hypersensitive toward it. So I don't want people to hear the wrong thing here. The first is you should have a regular one-on-one with your team. And I think weekly, and I think it should be budgeted for an hour. And I know there's a lot of different feelings about that. Bi-weekly, 30 minutes. But the first thing to do is that is not movable. One of the questions I ask in my leadership assessment is, what's the kind of thing that would cause you to miss a one-on-one with your team? And the wrong answers are many. The right answer is almost nothing. Maybe a customer thing that, you could understand. We serve customers, and so maybe the manager needs to be involved. And then if you do miss the one-on-one, getting it immediately rescheduled. And the point is, you're available every week for an hour. And for me, in an ideal world, my boss and I only see each other during that 1 hour, because I need and want a great deal of autonomy. So that's bare minimum. But that is sacrosanct. That doesn't get moved. That is not something that keeps getting canceled and redone, which, by the way, happens constantly. And then in that one-on-one, the best use of time is trying to understand what's been working well for this person and re-emphasizing those relative to what your standards are, right? Every company, there's a what you're trying to get done, measurable results. There's a how, which are the behavioral standards of your company, usually mostly inspired by your core values. And you should be being explicit with folks about what you see that they're doing that is working, to give them the best chance to repeat it. It's continue coaching, and it's way more important than improvement coaching, by the way. In fact, Positive Coaching Alliance, I mentioned this in the book, Positive Coaching Alliance says continue to improve should be a 5-to-1 ratio. And Positive Coaching Alliance is a big global nonprofit. They work at youth, high school, college, professional sports level. They're a legit organization. focused on helping coaches be good. It's not everyone gets a trophy. It wasn't 5-0, continue improve. It was 5-1. It's not infinity to one. It's 5-1. It's very reasonable. But the point is, people are doing a whole lot more well than they're doing poorly every day. You're not firing everyone, is my evidence. And so, 5-1 makes sense. Just real fast, I know you want to break in. That comes from a man named John Gottman, who wrote a book that's, I think it's like 7 principles for making a marriage work. One of the principles is 5-1, 5-1, or praise criticism, continue, improve. I don't care. So anyway, it's about being present. Um, you might need to be more present if your employee is struggling. You might need to be less present if they're like me. They feel competent. They have a lot of autonomy. But even when they're doing great, you need to be there to continue coach, and then try to be available to help them think through areas they're getting stuck, which happens for folks, and you can adopt in that moment more of interrogate their problem a little bit and help them think through it. So it's about presence, not a shadow, but presence. And sometimes that one-on-one, it doesn't feel like there's a ton to get done. And maybe you go ahead and let everybody get some time back. That's fine too. But let's make that decision consciously and together in that moment instead of just canceling them because it feels like there's nothing to do.
So what we're saying here, let's say, those listening have an average of 4 to 6 reports. What I'm hearing is that you should schedule 4 to 6 hours a week to provide each of your direct supports with, 1 hour of undivided attention from you. And in that situation, you are setting everything else aside. You're focusing and honing in on what's working well, and you wish to amplify that, call that out. You're having a conversation around how they're conducting themselves in accordance and congruence with the values. And the coaching style is continue rather than improve. I want to just hone in on that because for many listening, they may not be aware of the the distinction between continue coaching and improve coaching. Can you just explain that, Russ?
Yeah. By the way, not rather than, but with greater intensity. Continue with greater intensity over improves. Critically important to help people be successful. Improve coaching is sometimes called criticism. I think that word ends up, so a lot of people have a really hard time with that. They call it the hard conversation because it's criticism of work products, criticism of behaviors. I prefer improve coaching because it feels more like helping people to be successful. And I'm trying to use language that gets us away from the anxiety-inducing hard conversation. It doesn't need to be hard. It's like, hey, I'm here to help you improve. Continue coaching is about helping people know what to repeat as early as possible, becoming explicit. Don't take for granted they know that what they're doing is working. It may not have worked well in another context, or it may just be unique to this context. But say what I love about how you're doing this thing is X, Y, Z, to help convey to them. Great, keep going with that. That's really important. A little story that is maybe fun that I think helps to illustrate why this is so powerful. So I was coaching Little League baseball, 9, 10, 11-year-olds. And we had a very young team. The guy that I coached with, his name's Drew. We had a shared philosophy, which was development first, but winning matters. And not to be stupid youth coaches that, are poor behaviors. The kids want to win. And by the way, what's your standard that you're developing the kids if it's not ultimately on the scoreboard? That's the most objective thing we have. So that's how we coached. And we had a lot of success with our little guys. We had a lot of fun. And just so everyone knows, I tell a story. Parents always came to us at the end and said what an incredible year their kid had, even the worst kid on the team. So I don't want people to hear the wrong thing. And I'm very proud of that. But we did 5-1, maybe even more. And I did this thing. I started doing this thing after I went to a Positive Coaching Alliance seminar that I had to go to. They made us, all the coaches, go. I didn't want to go, but it was awesome. I learned about this 5-1 continue improve, 5-1 praise criticism. And what I started doing was keeping it practice something called the book. And it's not the most clever name ever. It was literally a lab notebook where for every sort of department of practice, I wrote down exclusively what the kids did well. literally starting with on time to practice. And I wrote down all the kids that were on time. If you weren't on time, you didn't get written down. But we also didn't call you out because when a 9-year-old is late to practice, guess whose fault that is? It's their parents' fault. It's not the
Mommy
kid's
and
fault.
daddy.
Okay. Yeah. And it's okay. Like people have real lives. All the way through to loud counting during stretching, counting out the stretches. And then when the counting gave way to, good hamstring stretch, we got into the standard of a hamstring stretch. All the way through to fielding a ground ball. Move your feet, center the ball in your stance, get your glove in the dirt. Cover the ball with your throwing hand, a direct line from ground to throwing shoulder, back foot, front foot, fire to first. And midway through practice, maybe the energy's lagging, we'd stop and I'd bring them all in and I'd read from the book. And I'd hold it up like Lion King, like, and the kids, of course, love this. They want to hear their name in the book. My own son giving me stink eye because I didn't mention him, for one thing or another. And what I realized, this seems like a silly thing that works on kids, right? But I'll remind you, 5-to-1 comes from 7 principles for a successful marriage. What I realized, Brendan, and this is so important, was because good continue coaching needs to be specific and sincere. If you're walking around saying good job, you're not doing this right. Specific and sincere. In order for me to give good continue coaching, I had to know and be able to articulate every single standard on the team. I think most managers, if they started a habit of continue coaching, would realize very quickly they are not fully conscious and able to articulate all the standards on their team. But by doing this, they'll actually improve that, and they'll probably create new standards. They'll erase unspoken old ones, and they'll kind of get to the core of things. And so it's such a powerful mechanism for codifying for you and your team exactly what our standards are, and then helping them understand when they're doing those really well. And then, by the way, 5-to-1, also coaching them on areas they need to improve on.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And again, I love the word improve. Immediately when you say the word improve, like I'm leaning in, I want to hear, I want to get the feedback from you to understand after I've received the 5 bits of praise and I'm going, and I can be better, Russ. I'm leaning in. My body language is receptive to what you're saying, as opposed to, okay, you've heard this, but now we're going to have a hard conversation. Immediately my body language changes, my state changes, and I'm not, certainly on a personal level, even when you say that, I don't feel that I'm going to actually listen. I'm going to wait till you're finished, and then I'm going to defend why I've done what I've done. And just that choice of word makes a complete difference to my state, just as you're saying it in this conversation.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I will say there are no silver bullets for this notion of improvement or criticism. It's very normal for people to have a defensive reaction. It's funny because you'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm so irritated with my boss. They just said keep doing what you're doing," which means basically they got no improvement coaching and they're frustrated by that. But then once the criticism comes, there's a defensiveness. But that's actually the most normal reaction. There's actually, I won't get into it here for time, but there's a lot of brain chemistry involved for why people do become defensive in that moment. But improve, I hope, changes the manager's mindset. It's better to brush and floss than it is to get a root canal. And so if you're regularly giving people improvement coaching, that's more like brushing and flossing. And I give a pretty good structure for how to do this. Literally an entrance ramp into the conversation, an exit ramp out, sort of what you're giving improvement coaching on. It's behaviors and work products really only. And then a SBI, SWI wrapper, which is situation, behavior, impact, situation, work product, impact, meaning like Brendan, in our team meeting situation, which can be the context or the problem, in our team meeting, what I love the way you challenged Alex's analysis. So this is a continue example. I love the way you challenged Alex's analysis. That's the behavior. The impact is it helped us get a better underpinning for this big decision that we have to make, impact. So that's a continue example using situation, behavior, impact. So I give that structure in the book, but when I do my presentations for companies, by this slide with the structure of a coaching conversation is by far the most photographed slide. People get up out of their chairs and photograph the slide. But all that said, I say that because there's a good way to do it that increases your chances of success, increases your chances of a lower defensive reaction. But just because you're not feeling you're feeling a difference. I have to say there aren't silver bullets. People, when it's time to hear about how they might improve, it's the most natural response is to become defensive. Now, you're not allowed to exit the room. You're not allowed to blow up. These are things you're not allowed to do. But the defensive reaction that's happening internally, I just don't want people to think they're wired weirdly or they're too sensitive. It's just you're just human. And most people have a little bit of a mild, at least mild defensive reaction, even with the word improvement coaching.
I really love the clarity in this. So if we take then just to kind of sum up where we've got to before we move into career, direction is a focus on purpose, clarifying the vision. Where are we going? Which ultimately creates that direction of travel. Here's where we are now. Here's where we want to go. And ultimately we anchor that in a purpose which provides the energy to get there. Coaching is about making yourself available and being present with your team on a one-to-one basis, ideally weekly. And the focus is really on continue-based coaching, on a 5-to-1 ratio in terms of continue versus improve. I love that clarity. So the career then, the third element of the big three, what do you mean by career, Russ?
Yeah. Have you ever seen a space movie, Brendan?
It's been a while.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a space movie where they need to do a slingshot maneuver? Have you ever seen this? Or are you familiar with this idea?
No, go ahead. Just explain this further.
All right. It's in every space movie. I'm watching a show on Apple TV called For All Mankind, and it's in there. It's basically the idea of, let's say the mission's in jeopardy. We're low on fuel. In the movie The Martian, they left the guy on Mars. They just left the guy on Mars. Anyway, and they don't have enough fuel, but they got to go get him. And so what they do is they use a planet's gravity, and they call it a gravity assist, to create enough acceleration to slingshot them back out into the far reaches of space so they can achieve the mission and get the guy off Mars or whatever. Slingshot maneuver, also called gravity assist. This is the mental model for helping people with their careers. You're the slingshot as a manager. So the first thing is like when I was at Twitter, I used to joke I was like a work grandpa for most of the team. I had a couple directs, but I had this really young team. And one time I remember a woman, she walks up to me sort of in the hall and says, "Hey, Russ, I want to come talk to you about my career." She's got a manager who reports to a manager who reports to me. And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, let's do it." We say, I say, talk to my assistant, we'll get it on calendar. And then I immediately go talk to her chain to understand what's going on. Turns out she was passed over for a promotion. I know instantly what that means. She doesn't want to talk about her career. She wants to talk about getting promoted. And I'm fine to have that conversation. I understand why promotions are important to people, but those are not the same. A promotion is a very small incremental next step that people care about. A little more scope, better title, a little more money, matters. Has almost no bearing on actual, like what your career means. So the idea here is if we're going to slingshot somebody into the far reaches of their career, we need to understand what that is. When I talk about they left the dude on Mars, it's very clear where they're going. They're going to Mars. They're slingshotting to Mars. So the most important thing you do in a good career conversation is actually conversation 2 of the 3 conversations that I outline in the book, which is helping to uncover someone's dream job. And then through a couple of sort of high quality questions, you turn that into this idea of what I call working vision statement that answers sort of 3 variables to that. And now this puts us in a position to help make small investments every day, help this person make tangible progress toward the vision. I can't make you your vision tomorrow as your manager, but I can help you make small investments. And that's conversation 3, which is sort of a 4-part framework for how we make the investments. So for example, we do need to talk openly and explicitly about what is your next step. Literally, what is your next job? By the way, that might include the notion of a promotion if the promotion is a different job. But given your long-term vision, what is the most sensible next step that I might take? That's kind of one thing. There's also the idea of developing your network. Who identified who are the people who can inform and influence not only your next move, but also this long-term vision that you have for yourself. Another area that's way overlooked is what can I change in your current job? So I had this woman one time who wanted to be the CFO of Disney. That was her vision. And we're like doing customer support in AdSense at Google, you know. And so I did this silly thing. I gave her the team's budget. And that sounds silly maybe to people, but guess what she did? She had to work with the FP&A team over in finance. She got to see how the finance team was run, right? She starts to get a feel for it. The CFO's job is to run the finance team. And so that was a way we could make a small change at her current job, and I didn't need to get her over to the finance team. I didn't have to ship her out to go get an MBA yet or something like that. And then the fourth part is about really formal kind of training, seminars, classes, events, maybe a degree. In her case, she didn't have a CPA, a certified public accountant, which meant if she was going to be the CFO of Disney, she had to go get an MBA. We can say maybe we don't want it to be that way. But it is. And so the idea of Russ, should I get an MBA, was informed by her vision, right? So what can I change in your current job? Let's get clear about your next step, right? Get all these given your long-term vision. Let's identify formal training opportunities to develop your skills, right? And then last is let's develop your network. Who are the people that can inform and influence? And while I can't place you in the CFO of Disney job, I can start to participate in your path to get there. And I understand that most of your path, you'll walk it without me in another setting. And that's your job. I don't care. That's your job. Russ, wait a minute. You're saying talk to people about their life outside these four walls? Yeah, I am. Because they're people. And it's better to understand these wants, needs, and desires and to participate in helping them than it is to pretend like they're not there. You know what? If you don't talk to people about this stuff, about their next job that might be off your team, that might be out of the company, if you don't talk to them about their vision, you'll talk to them about that degree program they might pursue. They're still talking to somebody about that, aren't they? And by the way, they might be getting real bad advice, worst of all. But one step below that is you're not able to participate. So that's the idea. I'm not a big believer in retention at all costs. But I am a believer in helping people not make the grass is greener mistake. Yeah. And I got a couple fun examples if you want, but that's kind of the idea.
Is there a paradox here, Russ, that I suppose the unwillingness, conscious or otherwise, of the manager or leader to have that career conversation with their team member exists because we don't want to be aiding and abetting a great person to actually leave the business. So, as I say, whether that's conscious or otherwise, we're reluctant to have that conversation. But in your experience, I suppose by virtue of the fact that these are the big three which aid greater engagement and better results, I'm making the assumption here that by having the conversation, what you actually do is strengthen engagement and ultimately find ways in which you can align your team members' vision with the vision of the organization, such that actually you can satisfy their dream within the context of what we're trying to do here as an organization.
So you're correct on every count. One is it's either conscious or otherwise, probably more often otherwise. But I don't want to aid and abet a departure. And the irony of all this is, of all the leadership behaviors that I talk through, this process actually is the most retentive, right? Engagement and retention are not the same. They are related. They're a little less related than most people would intuit, but they are related. And unbelievably, the act of helping a person identify all kinds of stuff that's off your team and out of this company is the exact kind of work that has them stay with you. And there's a couple hidden insights there. Number one is what a lot of people do is they say, well, this manager is investing in me by the way, the career conversation stuff is of everything in the book, it's the most original. I've been developing this process over a decade, and so most people haven't heard of it and don't think of career this way. So that's a little bit of the unconscious part. The first thing is they say to themselves, I got this manager who's investing in me in this very unusual way that is very me focused. And so people that have been around a little bit understand that's unusual. That's one kind of hidden insight. And so like, I'm gonna hang here for a minute. That's one. Two is this idea of current role. Develop your current role given your vision. Well, that by definition means I don't need to go anywhere. If I can make some adjustments in my current role that contemplate my long term vision, if I buy it'll help. Worst case, it builds a resume story if it doesn't actually build individual real skills. Well, that's retentive if you think about it, right? Um, and then last is like when I know someone's long-term vision. So I had a woman that worked for me at Twitter, my marketing lead. She was awesome, still is. And I knew her long-term vision, and she came to me and she got an offer to leave. And I was like, well, tell me about the offer. And I was like, Anne, this is not good enough. You want to be, this is your vision. This is silly. Like you go find a job that's, if you want to leave, fine. But go find a better. And she stayed. 6 months later, she got a way better job. She got to be the CMO, which is what she wanted to be. Now she's a CEO, by the way, for Gretchen Rubin Media. Just
Wow.
FYI. Like, so, I didn't retain her at all costs. I knew she was getting a little bit antsy in the saddle, and she was great. I wanted to keep her. I mean, she's awesome. We're still friends, and I still coach her on her career to this day. But the job she came to me with, objectively, we agreed ultimately as we talked it through for 2 hours after, at night, wasn't good enough, wasn't right given the vision. And so she stayed with me. Again, it was only 6, 9 more months, but she stayed. And so, and when the right job came along, I was like, hey, if you love someone, set them free, like Sting said. I said, yo, you need to that's awesome. You need to take that. And here we go. So those are a couple of the hidden insights why this activity of aid and abet and people to go, that's why it tends to have a retentive effect on average. Not always, but a lot more than you think. So yeah, there you go.
It's so powerful. Before we get into the close, for those scaling leaders who are listening, and there's so many other competing pressures on their time in the context of developing the proposition, ensuring that they invest in the processes within the business, spending time with the customers, maybe out in exploring new markets. What would you say to them in the context of how important what you've just described is in the overall context of them going back to our very original question of scaling with purpose?
Yeah. Nothing is more important than leading your people well. You got to remember, people deserve to be led well. If you're not sure if you're leading well, you should just assume you're not. I'm telling you, the overwhelming amount of evidence out there is actually most managers are pretty bad at the job. Even if they think they're good, they're usually bad. Even if their boss is telling them they're good, they're usually bad. My evidence, by the way, part of doing this well at a company, meaning having great managers at a company. So thinking from the chief people officer seat or the CEO seat, you have to select, teach, assess, coach. Select for leadership disposition, not because you were the best individual contributor. That's coin flip. You're the best salesperson. Coin flip whether you make a good sales manager. Literally coin flip. Select for leadership disposition. Teach the leadership standards. Select, teach, assess, coach. So you select once, you teach once, but then assess, coach happens ad infinitum. And the assessment is done from the perspective of your employees, nobody else. You can do it through survey, for example. They're the people that do the real work of the firm. By the way, 80% of those people report to a green or first-time manager. It's huge risk every company takes on. And they're the people we're fighting to attract, develop, and retain. The CEO doesn't deliver the results of the company. The people do. The CEO makes sure the environment is great. People just want to do great work, be totally psyched while doing it. It is the manager, Brendan, who creates or destroys the circumstances under which that occurs, the direct manager. And then last is coach when there are gaps. Select, teach, assess, coach. Um, and so your job is to deliver an aligned results. If you're a CEO, that the aligned result is whatever you've aligned on with the board. If you're a C-level reporting the CEO, it's whatever the aligned results, whatever you've aligned on with the CEO, that better be a component of what the CEO aligned on with the board, and you cascade that all the way down. And then enable the success of the people on your team, with success defined as, in part, delivering the aligned result. What could possibly what could possibly be more important than doing that every day? The one thing I'll let squirm in there is customer stuff, because the customers who ultimately we all serve. You serve the employees, they serve the customers, in whatever capacity, developing the products or literal customer service. So there's one thing I'd let sort of disrupt. And by the way, it's maybe the only thing that I'd say could be more important. But when I talk about it that way, what could possibly be more important than making sure everyone in the company is delivering an aligned result, and make sure every manager is enabling the success of the people on their team, where success is partially defined as delivering doing the best they can to deliver the aligned result, being successful to that end. I mean, somebody maybe had an answer to that. It's not a rhetorical question, but I'm telling you, I've been saying this stuff for a couple of years now, and I've never heard anybody who could tell me there's something more important.
I suspect everyone listening to this right now has just been stopped in their tracks. I'm certainly reflecting as you're speaking. Russ, again, our entire essence, our entire being, our entire purpose is around simple scaling. We wrote the book on it, but what I say to people is, don't confuse simple for being easy. It just means uncomplicated. What you've described and given a masterclass in, there's nothing complicated here, but it requires huge effort. And the effort starts with, I feel anyway, that personal scaling. And just as we come into the close, I'd like just for you to speak
real fast, may I? Just to pick up on a point you made. Writing a title is harder than writing a book. And the subtitle of my book's Being a Great Manager, Simpler Than You Think. We went to the mats to choose the word simple over easy. Simple but not easy. So heavy alignment on the idea that being able to say simple things and understanding they're not easy to do. So I'm real sorry to interrupt you there, but just wanted to touch on the massive point of alignment.
No, and that resonates in terms of the challenge with, I'm fascinated with the titles of books. We went through the absolute rigor with this and came back to simple scaling. And
it's a good title.
And ultimately I get pulled up in this quite a lot, but it's that confusion between and that misinterpretation that simple actually translates to easy, but it simply means uncomplicated, and it requires effort. What you've laid out is wonderful, but requires a huge amount of effort. And I'm getting a sense that effort starts with the leader themselves. Often we point the finger and, we can quickly articulate what this person needs to do to change, but actually it starts with the changes that we need to make ourselves. I'm curious to understand, Russ, clearly I'm listening to a guy here who's done a lot of deep work. What have you had to do in terms of behavioral change to arrive at a point where actually you've written a book on the essence of effective leadership?
Gosh, way too much to count. So a couple things. First, again, just a reminder that ultimately the book is a little bit less about like my experience as a manager, a little bit more about this quantitatively, rigorously derived set of behaviors that measurably lead to more engagement, more results. But I mean, look, I've won an award for being a great manager at Google, and I think 12 people won in 2012 or whatever it was, and our reward was our significant others and us got to go to Kauai with 3 members of the CEO's team. Like, it's a really big deal, and I'm very proud of it. I don't say that to brag. I say that to say I think there's some evidence I've been a good manager. And as I say that, the number of times I've been a bad manager for someone is many. And it's because of, gosh, it's just so complicated. Um, I had one direct support. I like that too. I had one direct support who, my goodness, this person had the hardest time focusing. And in an environment where I was trying to give her more autonomy, ultimately, I was too close to the absentee side for her, because I needed to be way more prescriptive about what I mean by focusing. What are your goals? She comes back with 13 goals. None of them are measurable. None of them matter. And I'd say, listen, I want you to erase every single one of those. And I want you to come back with 2 that focus on the 2 key ideas that we said. And I don't want to hear about the other stuff. And eventually, this was an adverse performance situation, eventually, even all the way to performance improvement plan. That's on me. I think probably inside, this person was really capable. But I didn't go far enough. I was too close to absentee and not close enough toward, being fully present in the right way for her. And I could go, I probably have an example at every stop where I wasn't the best manager I could be. I had a guy who worked for me at one stop who, we had to found a business, at Twitter. And the first hire I made was this guy. And the strategy that we pursued was counterintuitive, and it was brilliant. It was his, not mine. It was his. And I founded this business, and I hired a team of globally hundreds of people, including over in Dublin. And the reason that's interesting is I'm quite comfortable with that. That's my job, was to help get the organization off the original thesis of a strategy, which didn't make any sense. This guy helped me understand. And then not only build a team around the strategy that he had, but also help manage up. I hate that phrase, but help the people above me understand, hey, strategy we were pursuing isn't going to work. And this guy felt like, because he was responsible for the strategy, that he should have my job. This created a lot of tension. This created this. He had a big personality, big blast radius to my other directs. And the truth is, I didn't get that sort of squared away fast enough, because I recognized the unique, unbelievable talent of this human being. And there was some reconciliation that needed to occur, both with how I dealt with him as well as his own behaviors, that had a big impact on everyone around us. By the way, positive and negative. So, these are kind of, I guess the point I'm making, Brendan, is the behavioral changes I've had to make at different times, they're pretty custom. They don't deviate far ultimately from what's in the book, by the way. They become, what's in the book becomes a little, I keep reaching for it. That's why you see me do that. They're custom given the context, the team environment, the personalities, the individual that I'm supposed to be leading. Remember, it's not so much about leading the organization. It's about being a great manager for each of your directs and insisting they in turn do the same. And through that, that's how you lead an organization well. So I could regale you with stories. And as you recall in the book, basically every story about myself is a story of a failure. I could regale you with stories of behavioral changes I needed to make or made too late. And so I don't know. But ultimately, to write a book, it was about breaking away from what everyone else does, which is write about their opinion. And realize my opinion wasn't valuable because it just got tossed on the pile with everyone else's and added to the confusion. And, been a pretty good manager. Maybe my opinion's worth listening to. And I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. And so it was about building a team of Qualtrics, where we did this work mostly for Qualtrics. But it turned out we found some super scalable ideas that are persistent across. Doesn't matter size of company, doesn't matter industry. These things work no matter where you are. And so that was a reframing, that we got to get out of this. My opinion about good leadership, your opinion about good leadership, it's just confusing in the end. That's probably the biggest one. Right.
Having spent the last hour in your wonderful company, I can understand why you won an award at Google. Well done. Before we move into the close, is there anything in relation to, uh, you know, direction, coaching, career, the big three, and the concept of when they win, you win, that we haven't addressed, that you feel compelled to share with the listeners?
Yeah, just a couple things, and I'm going to do them rapid fire. Leadership by example never goes out of style. Leave that be. Leadership by example never goes out of style. Number one. Number two, and specifically in the context of coaching, um, prioritization, the fourth part of the 4-part framework. Prioritization is an exercise in subtraction, not an exercise in addition. It is about showing up every day and deciding what you're not going to do. Um, you're not going to win a lot of popularity contests by saying no. By the way, I cover a way to say no politely, but you still have to say no. And then last is always remember this conceptual idea. People just want to do great work and they want to be totally psyched while doing it. Those are not arbitrary ideas. Those are backed up and kind of really measurable ideas. And it is the manager more than any other factor. There's not even a close second. Not training, not the CEO, not the culture. It is the manager more than any other factor by a mile, probably by a factor like 2 to 1 at least, who creates or destroys the circumstances under which that can occur, and in which people can do great work and be totally psyched while doing it. So I think those are the, like, I think you were planning to ask a question about timeless takeaways. I'm not sure if, but those are my timeless takeaways.
Oh, well, okay. That's what I was going to come to. So I was going to be greedy and push
redo that
then. You've gotten ahead of me. We have indeed the closing tradition of asking 3 timeless takeaways, and I am going to be a little bit indulgent here because I'm loving the value that you're giving, Russ. And I mean, we shared it in your bio. You've had a career in the military. An exec at Google, at Twitter. You've mentioned, Qualtrics. It's you've authored this wonderful book. You've co-founded a company with one of our previous guests, who people will be familiar with, Kim Scott of Radical Candor. Just some incredible, rich experiences for such a young guy. Can you share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways? And what I mean by that is, go back to coaching the young sports team, and one of those young guys comes up and says, Russ, let's say you were only going to see them again for the next 2 minutes, and that was the last time that you would ever see this young person who has just come up to you, and he's asked for you to share with him, as he's now careering through life, 3 timeless takeaways. What would you share with him?
Yeah. So are we going a little different than what I've said?
Yeah, go as you wish. This is a young person, okay, who has literally presented themselves to you. You're going to see them this is the last 2 minutes of their life that you will see them, and they have asked you for advice as to 3 things that they should be very mindful of as they career through their lives.
Yeah, maybe the one really interesting setup changes how I think about this a little bit. If I could pick one, there are going to be moments at every stage of your life, whether it's your job or your relationships, your marriage, how you are as a parent one day, which may not seem possible for you to envision, but probably going to happen, where you're not doing well, by whatever standard you set. And you're going to think to yourself, man, I'm not good at this. And what I'd ask you to do every single time is just add the word yet. I'm not good at this yet. And then what I would ask you to do, I think I have another 60 seconds left with this kid. Then what I would ask you to do is, given we just agreed you're not good at this yet, What do you need to do to get a little better at it? I think if you could get everyone to think that way, there's limits. Like I do CrossFit, and the founder of CrossFit always says he's a big personality, son of a rocket scientist. CrossFit is a very rigorous, kind of measurable idea. But he says, I can deliver you to your genetic potential. I love that because it's very bold and arrogant as he is. But it also says there's a limit. There's a limit. I can't make you a superhero. Um, but that said, most people are nowhere near their limit at any point in their life on where they're coming up short. And so let's say to yourself, I'm not good at this yet. And then do me one more favor and think about what's one specific thing you can do right now to get a little closer to being better at this thing. That'd probably be my timeless takeaway. My number one timeless takeaway for that kid that I got 2 minutes with.
I love that. We write about that in our own book. Actually, it speaks to the wonderful work of Carol Dweck when she talks
It
about
is.
fixed versus growth mindsets, and just using that suffix of yet completely changes how you frame where you're currently at and the potential to achieve what you really want to achieve. And I love that kind of, you haven't achieved your genetic potential yet. That's recognizing and acknowledging that, look, everybody's born with different DNA. I'm never going to be an NBA basketballer, but I could get better at it and reach my own potential, which will still never get me near a court. But I like the fact that it's acknowledging that we all start here on different points on the track. What I reflect on when you say that is the danger of comparing ourselves to others, not acknowledging that we all start in different parts of the track.
Yeah. The saying is comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Boy, I feel like I do a whole podcast on the problem of comparing your comp, comparing where you are, comparing your trajectory, comparing yourself to anyone else is one of the most futile exercises you can take on as a human, and outside work. It is you just run your own race, compare yourself to yesterday's yourself, and try to be a little better than that person, and then look at everyone else and just celebrate what they're great at, and be excited for them. And I don't. It's funny, we built an addition here at my house that's pretty cool, right? And I had a neighbor who was a real jerk during the entire construction process. And I would tell some friends about some of the stuff he did, and the word that they used over and over was, I think he's just jealous. And I I don't know. I could never get my head around that. I don't understand it. I don't understand that emotion. I know it exists. I mean, for crying out loud, it's one of the seven deadly sins, right? Envy. But gosh, I can't get my head around why a person would be jealous of another. Why would you be envious of another? There's this complementary version of it that isn't true envy. It's like, man, I would love to be as articulate as you are. I'm envious of that. That's not it. That's not it. There's this uglier thing. That's the deadly sin version. That is, a function of comparison. And it's bad. It's wasted energy, wasted everything. Be happy for folks around you when they have their wins. Find the good in them and make sure you remind them that you see it. Continue coaching, by the way, is what that is. And if you want to compare to yourself yesterday and just I don't know, it's a cliche, 1% better every day. It's silly. But that's the idea, just be better than you were yesterday, and don't compare yourself to anybody else. It's such a waste, such an absolute waste. Yeah.
So, here. The older I've got, the more I've become clearer that there's so much wisdom in those cliches that we used to roll our eyes at whenever we heard them from somebody older. So, Russ, look, I want to thank you for your incredible wisdom today, your wonderful energy, for really showing up and delivering huge amount of value to our listeners. I am, on a personal note, I must reflect on everything that you've said today. It's given me cause to think. What's next for you?
Yeah, I'm more or less retired at this point.
No, you're too young to retire.
I'm I'm over 50, by the way, so I'm not that young. Um, and I'm doing some I do some advising. I'm on a board, do some advising. Like at this moment, I'm an operating partner at Goodwater, which is mostly just focused on the portfolio, helping those companies. Um, slinging books. I try to write some articles on LinkedIn, and then people seem to get value from those, I guess. And I'm just trying to be helpful. Is the short version. In hindsight, it's always how I've looked at my role in the world and in work. Ultimately, as a manager, I think that's what I've really more than anything else. I've just tried to be helpful, um, whatever that means, and so that's what I'm doing now. Um, I'm so maybe some increased advisory work. I do some speaking, I do some training, just hodgepodge of stuff that doesn't take me a ton of time. But yeah, I'm more or less retired. We're on a personal note, we're building a house in Montana, which is, also, I don't know if everyone listening knows where Montana is, but big, giant Western state in the US. Some people see Yellowstone and they think they know about Montana. So we're building a house up there, be ready in about a year. We're going to be surrounded by woods. And so what's next for me is to be like a hermit. I think personally, I'm trying to be more like a hermit. I don't seem it on this, I know, but I'm a massive introvert. Um, and I mean, like 1 degree below the most introverted person you can think of. So yeah, so that's it. Not too much, honestly. And I'm kind of digging it. I've been in, I sort of stepped aside from the chief people officer role at Goodwater. I guess probably about September, October. Transition over to operating partner, and have been picking up some. Yeah, I coach some people. I do some advice. And I really like it. I just get to be helpful, and it doesn't take a ton of time, and kind of like it.
Oh my goodness. I have this wonderful vision of the idyllic home that you're creating in Montana and in the woods. It sounds incredible. Part of your own career dream, no doubt. So I wish you every success with that. I'd love to stay in touch. I love what you do. We will create put links in the show notes to your website, which is a platform for people to learn more about your book and your work. If people want to connect with you directly, then Russ, where best outside of your website to find out a little bit more about you? I lost
Sorry,
you
just
there.
lost you there for a sec. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Did you get that? I'll run that again. Russ, look, if people want to find out a little bit more about you and connect with you, where best to do that?
Yeah, these days I think it's LinkedIn actually, and I worked at Twitter. I don't call it by the new name ever. I'm still there. RAL1 is my handle there, but LinkedIn's probably easiest. I'm the only you know bald Russ Laraway out there on Twitter on LinkedIn, so I'm super easy to find. And I'm posting. I write articles maybe every couple of weeks or something like that. So I think that's a good spot. Yeah, I got the website whentheywinyoowin.com. People want to follow along in the build in Montana. That's on Instagram.
Oh wow.
Operation Hannah Montana is the handle. Operation Hannah Montana. Um, and so they can follow along there if they like. It's silly, of course, but they can. So I think LinkedIn's probably the best
Brilliant.
spot.
Well, look, I wish you every success with the house build, and I suspect that you won't stay in retirement for too long. But you've too much value to give to people and to certainly the community of our listeners who have ambition to scale with purpose. Thanks again for an incredible masterclass. I appeal to everyone to go out and grab a copy of the book, where Russ obviously goes a lot deeper in terms of the things that we've discussed today. Russ, thanks again. Take care.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.